I told my mother-in-law I was pregnant. She smiled. And for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought that smile meant something good. I was 31 years old, 14 weeks along, standing in her kitchen that smelled like lemon polish and old money. I had rehearsed what I would say on the drive over. I had worn the blue dress she once said looked elegant on me. I had brought flowers, sunflowers, because I remembered she liked them, and I set them on the counter before I said the words. I was trying so hard. I had been trying so hard for 4 years. The smile disappeared in about 2 seconds. "How convenient," she said. Just that. She turned back to the stove and I stood there holding my own hands like an idiot, waiting for something that was never going to come. My husband reached over and squeezed my shoulder. That was his version of standing up for me. A shoulder squeeze. I had learned by then not to expect more. I should back up. My name is not important right now. What is important is that I spent 4 years married to a man who was the only son of a woman who had decided, approximately 5 minutes after our wedding, that I was a problem to be managed. My husband came from what people in certain zip codes call old family money. I came from a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, a mother who worked nights at a hospital, and a full academic scholarship that I earned by sitting in the library until it closed every single night for 4 years of college. I was a pharmacist. I had my doctorate. I had worked for everything I had. None of that mattered to my mother-in-law. To her, I was an outsider who had gotten her claws into the right man at the right time. The trust fund attached to my husband's family, just over $8 million, managed and controlled by his mother until appropriate distribution, was something she referenced constantly in oblique, careful ways. Never directly. She was too smart for that. But it was always there, hovering at the edge of every conversation like a ghost neither of us was supposed to acknowledge. When I got pregnant, I genuinely believed things might change. I was naive, I know that now, but I want you to understand that I was not stupid. I was hopeful, which is a different thing. And hope is not a character flaw even when it costs you everything. The pregnancy was planned. My husband and I had talked about it for a year. He was excited. Genuinely, I believe that. He held my hand at the ultrasound and cried a little, the kind of cry men do when they think no one is paying attention. I loved him for that. Whatever came later, I want to be fair, he was not a villain. He was something harder to forgive than a villain. He was a man who loved his mother more than he loved his own conscience. My mother-in-law's behavior shifted immediately after I told her. Not dramatically at first. Small things. She started calling my husband every day, sometimes twice. When we came for Sunday dinners, she would pull him into her study for private conversations and come out with her expression carefully arranged into something neutral. She started sending him articles, I found them in his browser history once, about paternity fraud and financial manipulation in marriages. She never said a word to my face. She was surgical about it. Precise. 2 months into my pregnancy, she invited us to a family weekend at the lake house. My husband's sister was going to be there, and a few of their cousins. I did not want to go. I had a bad feeling that I could not articulate, the kind of feeling that lives in your stomach and does not have language yet. But my husband asked me, and I loved him, and so I packed a bag and I went. The first day was fine, normal even. My sister-in-law was warmer to me than usual, which I took as a good sign and now understand was not. We sat on the dock in the evening and I let myself believe, for a few hours, that this was going to be okay, that my daughter, we had found out by then, a girl, was going to have a family who wanted her. The second day, my mother-in-law asked me to walk with her. Just the two of us, around the property. She said she wanted to show me the garden her own mother had planted 50 years ago. I thought maybe this was it? The conversation where things finally turned, where she chose to be a grandmother instead of a gatekeeper. We walked for maybe 10 minutes. She talked about the garden. She talked about the history of the property. She talked about the history of the property. She talked about my husband as a child. And then, at the far edge of the yard where the lawn dropped off toward the water with no one else in sight, she told me she knew the baby wasn't his. I stopped walking. She said it very calmly. She said she had been watching me for 4 years, and she had seen the way I calculated, the way I planned, the way I had always had one eye on the exit. She said I had trapped her son for financial security and that I was not going to get away with it. She said she had already spoken to a lawyer. I said, "The baby is your son's. I have never been with anyone else." She looked at me the way you look at something you have already decided to discard, and then she put her hand on my chest and shoved me. It was not a dramatic shove from a movie. It was one firm, deliberate push, and I was standing at the edge of a slope and I went down it. I fell maybe 8 feet before I caught a tree root with both hands. I scraped my arms down to the elbows. I hit my hip on something and fell the crack that turned out to be a hairline fracture. I lay there on the wet grass at the bottom of that slope for I don't know how long, with the lake 15 feet away and the sound of birds like nothing had happened. She did not come down to check on me. When I finally got myself up and back to the house, she was in the kitchen making tea. My husband was sitting at the table and he stood up when he saw my arms. His mother looked at me over his shoulder and said very gently, "Oh, sweetheart, I told you the slope was slippery." I said, "Be careful." My husband looked at me. He looked at his mother. He said, "Are you okay? What happened?" I looked at my mother-in-law's face, completely composed, waiting. And I made a decision in that moment that probably saved my daughter's life. I said, "I slipped. I need to go to the hospital." I did not accuse her. Not yet, because I am a pharmacist and I understand the difference between reacting and acting, and I knew that if I said what had happened in that kitchen with no witnesses and no evidence, nothing was going to happen to her and everything was going to happen to me. My husband drove me to the nearest urgent care. Hairline fracture in my hip, badly lacerated arms. Mild shock. The baby was fine, they checked immediately. And her heartbeat was steady and perfect, and I cried so hard the nurse thought I was having a breakdown. I was not having a breakdown. I was relieved in a way that has no adequate description. Here is what my mother-in-law did not know. 3 weeks before that trip, I had installed a small camera in my overnight bag, not because I suspected anything specific, just because something in my body had been sending signals for months that I had not been listening to carefully enough. The camera was the size of a button. It was motion activated. It had been running the entire time. It had captured nothing from the walk. We were outside, away from my bag. But it had captured something I did not even know it captured, until I reviewed the footage 2 days later, lying in bed with my hip in a brace. The night before the walk, my mother-in-law had come into the guest room while my husband and I were asleep. I had not woken up. My husband had not woken up. She had gone through my toiletry bag. She had taken out my prenatal vitamins. She had stood there for approximately 4 minutes doing something I could not see clearly. The angle was wrong. And then she had put them back and left. I sat with that footage for 6 hours before I called anyone. The person I called was not my husband. I called my colleague, a clinical pharmacist I had worked with for 3 years who specialized in toxicology. I drove to her house that evening and I handed her my vitamin bottle and I said, "I need you to test this. I need you to tell me if anything is wrong with it." She called me 48 hours later. Her voice was very careful when she said it. There was a compound in 4 of the capsules that did not belong there. It was not something that would show up on a standard tox screen. It was the kind of thing you would have to know to look for. It was not enough to kill me. It was, she said quietly, the kind of dose that could cause a miscarriage in the first trimester. We were past the first trimester. The dosing might have been based on an incorrect assumption about how far along I was. I put the phone down. I sat on my bathroom floor for a long time. Then I got up, because I have never been the kind of person who stays on the floor, and I started making a list. The next morning I called a family law attorney. I did not tell my husband. I went to the consultation alone, with the footage on a USB drive, and the vitamin bottle in a sealed bag. The attorney, I will say she was the best decision I made in that entire period, told me to document everything, say nothing, and come back in 1 week. I went home. I made dinner. I kissed my husband goodnight. I lay there in the dark next to him listening to him breathe, and I thought about 4 years of Sunday dinners and shoulder squeezes and oblique comments about trust funds, and I thought about my daughter's heartbeat on that monitor at the urgent care, and I thought about my mother's hands, how rough they always were from the hospital soap, and how she had worked nights for 15 years so I could go to college and never need anyone's money to survive. I did not sleep at all that night, but I was not afraid. I was focused. There is a difference. Over the next 3 weeks, I collected everything. I had the footage. I had the vitamins in an evidence bag. I had a detailed timeline of every incident over 4 years, dates, times, witnesses where they existed, exact words as I had recorded them in a journal I kept on a password-protected app on my phone. I had emails my mother-in-law had sent my husband that he had accidentally forwarded to me. One of them, from 8 months before, said explicitly that she was concerned I had married him for positioning and that she intended to make the situation untenable. I had screenshots. I had everything. I gave it all to my attorney. My attorney filed a police report on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, 2 detectives had spoken to my toxicology colleague. By Friday, they had a warrant. My husband found out the same day the police arrived at his mother's house. He called me from the car in our driveway. I could hear he had been crying. He said, "Is this real? Did she really do this?" I said, "Yes," he said. "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." And I meant it. I believe he didn't. And I meant it. I believe he didn't know. I also know that not knowing is only an excuse up to a certain point. There is a version of not knowing that is genuine ignorance, and there is a version of not knowing that is a choice you make every Sunday dinner, every shoulder squeeze, every time you go into your mother's study for a private conversation and come out looking carefully neutral. I loved my husband enough to tell him the truth. I was not sure I loved him enough to stay. My mother-in-law was charged with aggravated assault and tampering with a consumable product. The second charge carries serious federal weight when the victim is pregnant. Her attorney was excellent and very expensive. It did not matter as much as she thought it would. The footage, the vitamins, the documented history, it was what my attorney called a well-built case. My colleague testified. I testified. The detectives had done thorough work. She was convicted on both counts. She is currently serving time in a federal facility. The trust fund, it turned out, had been partially liquidated over the previous 2 years in ways that her own financial manager had flagged as irregular. That became a separate proceeding. My husband retained his portion. He did not contest our divorce settlement. My sister-in-law called me once after the verdict. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that I still have not listened to. Maybe someday. Probably not. My daughter was born healthy on a Tuesday morning in April. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She has her father's nose, which I find mostly funny. She has my mother's eyes, which makes me cry in the best possible way about twice a week. My mother flew in from Columbus the night I went into labor. She sat in the waiting room for 11 hours. When the nurse brought my daughter out so she could hold her for the first time, she looked up at me over that tiny head and said, "I always knew you were going to be okay." My mother has never been a particularly sentimental woman. She said it like a fact, the way she says everything. Like it had always been true and she was just confirming the data. I am 33 now. I run my own compounding pharmacy. I built it from a small lease in a strip mall 18 months ago, and it is already the busiest independent pharmacy in the county. I specialize in pediatric formulations and custom hormone therapy, work that requires precision, patience, and the kind of attention to detail that comes from spending your entire life being told you have to be twice as careful as everyone else just to be taken seriously. It turns out that skill set is worth something. People sometimes ask me if I regret those 4 years, the marriage, the dinners, the hope I kept choosing. I do not regret them. I regret nothing about my daughter's existence, and she would not exist without that exact sequence of events, including the terrible ones. What I understand now, in a way I could not have understood at 27, is that my mother-in-law did me an accidental favor. She forced me to stop waiting for someone else's family to accept me and start building the only family I actually needed. There is a quote I keep on a small card above my pharmacy bench. I wrote it myself the morning my divorce was finalized, sitting in my car in a parking garage before I went in to open the shop. It says, "You cannot adulterate what has been properly compounded." I know that sounds like pharmacist humor. It is also just true. She tried to put something harmful into something that was healthy and carefully built, and it did not work because I already knew how to read the formula. I had been reading formulas my entire life. My daughter is sitting on the floor of my office right now with a wooden puzzle that is technically for 3-year-olds, and she is 18 months old and she is already halfway through it. She keeps looking up at me to check if I am watching. and every time I nod, she goes back to work with this expression of complete, furious concentration. I know that expression. I see it in the mirror every morning. This is what it cost me to get here: a marriage, a hip that still aches in cold weather, 4 years of Sundays I will never get back, and a version of myself that believed other people's acceptance was something I needed to earn. This is what I have now: everything that matters. My daughter just finished the puzzle. She looked up at me and raised both arms in the air like she had won a championship. I raised mine back. This is what winning actually looks like: not a courtroom, not a verdict, not a woman sitting in a federal facility somewhere wondering how it all went wrong. This, right here, this office, this child, this ordinary Tuesday morning. This is what I built from the foundation they tried to destroy. You cannot poison something that already knows what it is made of. If you are in a situation where someone is systematically trying to make you doubt your own reality, please hear this. Document everything. Not because you were planning a war, but because clarity is its own protection. Write down the dates. Keep the emails. Trust the part of you that says something is wrong even when you cannot prove it yet. Your instincts are data. They are the most important data you have. And if you have ever had to walk away from a family, built or born, to save yourself and someone you love, I want you to know that what comes after the walk is not emptiness. It is space. It is the first real space you have had in years to build something that no one else can contaminate. Build it carefully. Build it well. Know exactly what is in every capsule. I promise you, it holds. I have thought a lot about why my mother-in-law did what she did. Not to excuse it. There is no version of this where it becomes excusable. But because understanding something is different from forgiving it, and I needed to understand it before I could fully let it go. She was not crazy. That is the part people find hardest to accept when I tell this story. She was calculating. She had decided that I was a threat to something she believed belonged to her. Not just the money, but the story of her family. The version where her son married someone from the right world, and everything stayed orderly and controlled. I did not fit that story. And rather than adjust the story, she decided to remove me from it. That is what greed actually looks like up close. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is a woman standing in a guest room at 2 in the morning, opening a vitamin bottle with steady hands, telling herself she is protecting her family. It is 4 years of careful, quiet erosion. It is a push at the edge of a slope and then tea on the stove 5 minutes later. What she did not calculate, what people like her never calculate, is that the thing they are trying to destroy is usually stronger than they know. She looked at me and saw someone who needed her son's family, her son's money, her approval. She did not see someone who had spent 30 years building a skill set precise enough to catch exactly what she had done. She did not see my mother's hands, rough from hospital soap or the library at closing time, or a woman who had already survived everything she needed to survive before she ever walked into that family's kitchen. Every action she took came back to her through the exact channels she had tried to weaponize. She tampered with medication. And a pharmacist caught it. She pushed me on a slope thinking there were no witnesses. And there was a camera she had not thought to look for. She spent 4 years trying to make me feel unqualified, unwelcome, unworthy. And every one of those years I was quietly documenting, quietly building, quietly learning exactly what I was dealing with. That is not luck. That is what happens when someone underestimates a person who has been paying attention their entire life. I think about my daughter learning to do that puzzle on my office floor. That expression of furious concentration on her face. Nobody taught her that. It is already in her, and I think about what I want her to understand when she is old enough to understand anything, that intelligence without integrity is just a tool for harm. That resilience without ethics is just stubbornness. That the goal is not to be the hardest person in the room. It is to be the most honest one, the most careful one. The one who does not cut corners even when cutting corners would be easier. My mother-in-law was intelligent. She was not honest. She was resilient in her own way. She was not ethical. And look where all of that landed her. I am not smarter than she was. I am not tougher. I just refused to become what she was trying to make me. Someone who operates from fear and control rather than from clarity and principle. That refusal, sustained over 4 years and through things that nearly broke me, is the only reason I am sitting here now. Your integrity is not a weakness. Your precision is not paranoia. Your instincts are data, the most important data you have. Trust them. Document everything. Build carefully. And never let anyone convince you that the life you earned belongs to them.